I still remember the sound of dirt hitting his coffin when a stranger grabbed my arm and whispered he was my dad. I turned around and saw a boy. Maybe 19. Maybe 20. With my husband's eyes. My husband's jaw. My husband's hands. And in that moment, standing in a black dress at my own husband's grave, I realized I had been living inside a lie so deep I couldn't see the walls. I couldn't scream. I couldn't cry. I just stood there, holding a rose I never dropped, while 22 years of marriage collapsed under my feet like ash. Everyone around me kept their heads down. The priest was still speaking. But I had gone somewhere else entirely. Some cold, silent place where nothing made sense anymore. And what I would find out over the next 2 weeks would be so much worse than a secret son. My name is not important. What matters is who I was before that day. I was someone who believed in ordinary happiness. I grew up in a small, quiet house with parents who stayed married their whole lives. That was all I ever wanted. Something steady. Something real. I met Daniel when I was 24. I was working at a legal firm, just an admin assistant, answering phones and filing contracts. He walked in one afternoon with a broken umbrella and a grin that made me forget what I was doing. We dated for 2 years. He proposed at a kitchen table with no ring. He said he'd buy one when he could afford one worth giving me. I thought that was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. We married young. We built slowly. I gave up the idea of a big career to hold our home together while he built his business. I was proud of that. I was proud of us. I had no reason not to be. Or so I thought. Daniel was not a perfect man. He was stubborn. He could be distant. But he was generous in the ways that counted. He coached our daughter's soccer team for 4 straight seasons, even though he knew nothing about soccer. He made pancakes every Sunday morning without being asked. He remembered the names of my friends' children. Small things. But the small things are the architecture of a life, aren't they? We had 2 kids together. Our daughter Mia and our son Carter. We had a mortgage that took 14 years to pay off. We had the same argument about the thermostat for 2 decades and never once resolved it. We had a drawer in the kitchen stuffed with takeout menus we never used because Daniel always cooked. That was our marriage. Imperfect and layered and entirely mine, or so I believed. He died of a sudden cardiac event. No warning. No goodbyes. One morning he was there, and by noon he was gone. He was 51 years old. And I thought I knew every single thing about him. I was wrong about that, in ways I still can't fully measure. Looking back now, the signs were always there. I just didn't have the right frame to see them. About 8 years into our marriage, Daniel started taking one solo trip every year. He called it his reset. A few days alone, fishing or hiking, somewhere quiet. I never questioned it. I respected it, actually. I thought it was healthy. There was one name that appeared in his phone more than I'd noticed at the time. Just initials T. M. I saw it maybe twice. Asked once casually. He said it was a client. I let it go. He also started a separate savings account about 12 years ago. He said it was for emergencies. For tax purposes. I was never on it. He handled our finances. I trusted him completely. He made good money. His contracting business pulled in around $180,000 a year by the time our kids were in high school. We were comfortable. I had no reason to dig. But here is the thing about secrets. They don't hide forever. They just wait for the worst possible moment to surface. The week after Daniel's funeral, I had to start going through his things. That's the part no one warns you about. Grief has paperwork. I found his laptop on the desk in his office, where it always sat. His phone had already been returned to me by the hospital. I wasn't looking for anything. I was looking for insurance documents, account numbers, the practical business of death. But when I opened his laptop, his email was still logged in. And in the drafts folder, not sent, just sitting there, I found a message. It was addressed to someone named Tyler. The subject line was blank. The message just said, "I know this isn't enough. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I think about you every day." It was dated 3 weeks before he died. I closed the laptop. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes not moving. Then I told myself it was nothing. A business contact. A misunderstanding. Something I didn't have the full story on. I was so desperate to keep the version of Daniel I talked myself right out of what I already knew. 3 days after finding that email, the boy from the funeral called me. He had found my number through an obituary. His name was Tyler. He was 20 years old. And he told me, in a voice that shook the entire time, that Daniel had been his father. That he had known since he was 14. That Daniel had been sending him money every single month for 6 years. He told me the amount. $400 a month. Automatically transferred from that separate account I was never on. He told me his mother and Daniel had a relationship that ended before Tyler was born. That Daniel had never publicly acknowledged him, but he had never fully walked away either. He paid for Tyler's school supplies. He showed up to one graduation. He kept him at a distance that was just close enough to call himself present. Tyler wasn't angry. That was almost harder to take. He was grieving. He had lost his father too, and he had nowhere else to bring that grief except to me. I sat on the kitchen floor after we hung up, right there on the cold tile, and I didn't move for a very long time. Daniel was gone. You can't confront a dead man, and that might be the cruelest part of all of this. There was no one to look in the eye, no one to demand answers from, but Tyler's mother was still very much alive. Her name was Sandra. I found her through Tyler, who gave me her number without hesitation. He seemed almost relieved, like he had been waiting for someone to finally connect the two halves of his life. I called her. She answered on the second ring, and the conversation that followed was one of the strangest of my life. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't triumphant. She was tired. She told me she and Daniel had a brief relationship before he and I were serious, but that it had continued, on and off, for almost 4 years into our marriage. She said she hadn't known about me in the beginning. By the time she did, she was already pregnant. She kept the baby. She ended things with Daniel. She said she'd spent 20 years trying to give Tyler a normal life, while Daniel hovered at the edges of it. She didn't sound like a villain. She sounded like someone else he had broken. I told my children. That was the hardest thing I have ever done. Mia was 20 and in her second year of college. Carter was 17. They sat across from me at the same kitchen table where Daniel had made pancakes every Sunday morning. And I watched their faces go through the same sequence mine had. Disbelief. Then anger. Then a hollow, quiet sadness that was worse than either of the first two. Mia didn't speak for 2 days. Carter put his headphones on and didn't take them off. We were all grieving something new on top of the grief we were already drowning in. The worst part wasn't the secret itself. It was the mathematics of it. 20 years of monthly payments. More than $336,000 over 6 years alone. And who knows what was spent before the transfers started. Money from our life. From our mortgage payments and grocery runs and family vacations. At least, I couldn't stop wondering if that was where it had come from. I felt erased. Like I had been a supporting character in my own marriage. Like everything I had been built on someone else's stage. There was a morning, about 3 weeks after the funeral, when I woke up and something had shifted. I'm not sure how else to describe it. I had been sleeping in the guest room because I couldn't lie in our bed. I got up before the sun. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and I just started writing. Everything I knew. Every date. Every amount. Every name. I wasn't crying. I was thinking. Daniel's estate was still being processed. I was his surviving spouse. I had legal access to everything, including that separate savings account. What I found when I finally got full access to his financial records wasn't just the dollar one, 400 monthly payments. There were other accounts, a brokerage I had never heard of, a life insurance policy I had never been told about, and the beneficiary on that policy was not me. It was Tyler. Specifically, a trust set up in Tyler's name, worth $240,000. I could have collapsed again. Instead, I picked up the phone and called a lawyer. My lawyer's name was Patricia. She had been practicing estate law for over 30 years, And she had the kind of calm that made you feel like the problem had already been solved before she'd even heard it. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting once. Then she set down her pen and said, "There are several things here we can address. But I want you to understand. One of them involves a 20-year-old boy who didn't choose any of this." That stopped me. Because she was right. Tyler hadn't asked to be born into this. He hadn't asked to be kept a secret. He hadn't hidden anything from me. Patricia helped me contest the beneficiary designation on the life insurance policy. Not to take the money, but because Daniel had named a minor trust without proper legal documentation, and it created a probate complication. I also discovered that the brokerage account held just over $90,000. That money was marital assets. It was legally mine. We began the process quietly. No announcements. No warnings. I just let the law do what the law does. The estate was settled 4 months later. The $90,000 brokerage account was transferred to me in full marital assets, no contest. The life insurance policy, because it lacked proper trust documentation, went through probate. Patricia argued it on my behalf. I won the right to $180,000 of that policy. The remaining $60,000 was restructured into a proper legal trust for Tyler, one that he could access when he turned 25, not before, and that I had agreed to voluntarily. I didn't fight Tyler for it. I didn't want to. He was a kid. But I was done being the one who absorbed the consequences of another person's choices. There was something else. Daniel's business partner, a man named Greg who had been his closest friend for 18 years, reached out to me after the estate closed. He told me he had known. Not everything, but enough. He had known about Tyler for at least 3 years. He had said nothing. He wanted to apologize. I listened to his apology. Then I told him I was selling my share of the business, my legal inheritance as Daniel's spouse, to a competing firm. Greg lost his business partner, his business, and his closest friendship in the span of 6 months. I didn't plan that part. But I won't pretend it didn't feel like the world correcting itself. I still think about Tyler sometimes. We exchanged a few messages after the estate closed. He is in college now. He seems like a good person. He got handed a complicated life through no fault of his own, and I think he's doing his best with it. I don't hate him. I never could. What I carry now isn't anger anymore. It's something quieter. A kind of clarity. I thought for a long time that the worst thing Daniel did was have a secret son. But that isn't it. The worst thing he did was let me build my entire sense of self inside a structure he knew was cracked. He let me trust something hollow and call it solid. What I know now, after all of it, is this: you cannot unknow something. But you can choose what you build next. I kept the house. I sold the business. I have enough. I have my kids. I have Patricia's number saved in my phone. And I have something I didn't have before, a version of myself that nobody else was in charge of. She is smaller in some ways, and completely unbreakable in others. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you've ever stood somewhere and realized the ground underneath you wasn't what you thought it was, leave a comment below. Tell me how you got through it. I genuinely read them. If this story moved you or meant something to you, please hit like and subscribe to Dossier Karma. It truly helps this channel grow, and I appreciate it more than I can say. There are more stories here, and some of them are even harder to believe. I'll see you in the next one.